I'm going to introduce Stephen Chung, and Stephen is the Chief Operating Officer of LAEDC and the President of the World Trade Center of Los Angeles. In his role as a COO, he brings together the capability of LAEDC's mission delivery department areas, including the business assistance and industry cluster development, LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics, communications and marketing, and public policy, into one single team that delivers LAEDC's critically important public benefit mission. So with that, welcome, Stephen, and it's great to partner with LAEDC.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for the invitation to join this really important conversation. It's a delight and an honor to be here, and just want to say thank you for the opening. It's wonderful to hear the programs that you guys have planned. It's so important during this time. As you mentioned, LAEDC's focus as a nonprofit organization here in Los Angeles is to advance opportunities and prosperity for all. And in this very challenging time, we utilize our research capability to really get a deeper understanding of what's going on in the local community. And then looking at that trend to create programs in our workforce development, our business assistance, our industry development, and our international foreign direct investment attraction arms to make sure that we have a thriving economy. As we're looking at the numbers, which I'll talk a little bit later as I'm introducing the speaker, we've seen a lot of challenges that we face this year, and that challenge is going to unfortunately continue early into next year. And it's going to take a concerted effort between the nonprofit organization, the private sector, and government for us to basically weather this storm together. This is not going to be a quick recovery, and that's why we need strong leadership and important partnerships so that we can streamline our processes and streamline our resources in order to serve the public more efficiently. And we are excited about what's going to happen in the upcoming months so that we can get these programs started, and also very excited that we have leaders like Speaker Rendon who's able to lead us through this process. David, just want to check in with you. Shall I start with introduction now, or shall we wait a little bit longer for the speaker to join us?
I think we have just a little bit more. Stephen, tell me a little bit, Stephen. I know that LAEDC is itself very committed to an inclusive economic growth approach to make sure that we lead from the bottom, not from the top, like we have traditionally done in recoveries. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was really timely, as you're mentioning before, looking at a lot of challenges that surfaced in 2020. We at LAEDC were already going through a strategic planning process, looking at the future of LAEDC starting in 2019. As we enter 2020, to see the racial inequity, the gender inequity that's been happening in Los Angeles and throughout the nation, I think what we saw is COVID-19 just exacerbated and also revealed these issues that have been apparent to many of us over the last few decades, if not centuries. So our focus with our strategic plan is to really align our resources to be able to serve these communities that have been forgotten, that have been left behind. And this includes many populations throughout Los Angeles. We sometimes look at Los Angeles as a macro region, right? With 10.2 million people in LA County. And, speaking that we have another division, our World Trade Center Los Angeles, our international side. We sell Los Angeles to the rest of the world, and why it's so important for them to invest here in Los Angeles. So our message to them is this is a greater Los Angeles region of 18.7 million people. Our GDP for this entire region is well over $15 trillion. So it's, it's not 15, it's $1.5 trillion, making us one of the strongest economies in the world. But at the same time, with such great advancements for our regional economy, we still see some of the most underserved and severe poverty that we've seen throughout the nation. And so this income divide, this inequity, it's now worsened because of COVID-19, because the impact is even more severe on our LMI community and our communities that traditionally don't have access. So LAEDC over the last few months have really quickly pivoted and adjusted our program to make sure that we're targeting these communities that have not traditionally been served so that they can get the most services and access some of the programs that are available. I'll give you a quick example. Our CEO, Bill Allen, worked together with the nonprofit community community as well as the philanthropic community to create something called the Community Connectory. Basically, there's a lot of information that start becoming available to our public immediately after the stay-at-home order became in effect. And unfortunately, some of this information was not passed on to certain communities because their mode of receiving that information is not by text or it's not by Twitter. They don't follow the supervisors or the mayors or the speakers accounts because they maybe it's a language barrier, maybe it's because of the digital divide because they don't have reliable internet access. So based on that, we have to basically devise a new approach. And this new approach actually took us back about 20 years. We did a postcard campaign to basically give them information in various languages in the postcard so that they can get the information and call our hotline so that they know to access this information rather than relying on the Twitter feed. So these are the approaches that we have to adjust to based on the needs of the community. It's been a challenging experience because with Los Angeles, as we mentioned, is a really large region, 10.2 million people with a small nonprofit like ours, to be able to serve that many people is going to be very challenging. And that's why these collaborations with Unite LA, with the County of Los Angeles, with all of our partners, including the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, is so vital to make sure that our communities are taken care of.
Terrific, Stephen. Thank you. And I think I have a message that the speaker is just joining us. So Stephen, now I'll turn it to you to make the formal introduction.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. And again, delight to be here today. Again, my name is Stephen Chung, the Chief Operating Officer for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, as well as the President of the World Trade Center Los Angeles. It's my honor to be invited to introduce the speaker. Speaker Rendon, great to see you again. I was just sharing some stories before we started, and I was remembering that we actually met in 2015. I don't think you remember this, but the first time we met, we were actually kayaking at the Port of Los Angeles.
Oh, did you fall in?
Yeah, that was David Lebatique. He fell in, but I didn't. But we were just talking about that story. But what was, for me, I remember as we're going through the Port of Los Angeles, one of the economic drivers for this entire region, you're looking at the port in a different way. You're asking a lot of great questions about the workforce development aspect, the environmental impact the port operation has. And that has been kind of my view of how you've taken your role as a speaker, looking at the impact it has on our local community in various way. And for the audience that are here today, we're delighted to be joined by the Speaker of the California State Assembly. Speaker Rendon has been the speaker since March of 2016. And he's been the champion for education advancement, workforce development, talent development, to ensure that our youth really have an opportunity to excel in this really challenging economy that we're facing. His background, even before becoming a public official, as an educator, as a nonprofit leader, and as an environmental activist, really shapes his policies and the work that he's done. And that's why in this challenging time, I was mentioning before to David, why it's so important for us to have leaders that are from the community, that understand our issues and can fight for us. And your work, especially on the early childhood education, being able to secure over $530 million for our system is so impactful and so important. And on top of it, as we're looking at some of the challenges up ahead, LAEDC recently conducted a research analysis based on the impact of COVID-19 on our economy. And what we found is that from March until about the end of August and into September, that's when the numbers became available. Over 437,000 jobs were lost in the LA County region alone. That's devastating. And it took us forever to basically build up a strong economy, to have a low unemployment rate of 4.2%. And overnight, basically that just went out the window. And what's even more impactful when it comes to the statistics and analysis that we did was that we found that 44% of unemployment insurance claims in California during that period were filed by people that were under 34 years old. So that's a huge population of the 5-point-something million people that file for unemployment insurance. And if you break down the data even more, and that's really alarming for us, is that 56% of these individuals who filed for unemployment insurance only had a high school degree or less. And so the folks that actually have higher education seem to be doing a bit better in this economic crisis. And that's why it's so important for us to invest in the future of our education system in terms of aligning our programs so that our industries, our governments, and our nonprofit sectors are aligned to support the development of this entire ecosystem. When we're going into recovery in 2021, we can't just go back to the status quo. As David and I were mentioning before, COVID-19 has not made this issue. COVID-19 has revealed that we have these income inequality issues, racial injustice, and gender divide. And we need to basically reimagine our economy, reimagine Los Angeles, and reimagine California in the way that we haven't seen before. Because if we go back to the status quo and go back to the old normal, it's not working. The homeless issue in Los Angeles was already devastating before 2020. And now we don't even have the new numbers yet, but we know it's going to be a lot more significant. And so moving forward in the future, we need strong leaders like Speaker Rendon to help us lead the way as we're facing some of the most dire challenges in the future. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome Speaker Anthony Rendon to join us for this conversation. We thank you for your leadership. We thank you for your work, and we thank you in advance for the hard work that you'll be embarking on over the next few months and few years. Ladies and gentlemen, Speaker Anthony Rendon.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And it's good to see you again. Good to see you out of the port. But it's good to see you again. It's good to see David and a lot of friends on the call.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're going to have a little chat about a number of things, but I want to just give the floor to you first and see if you want to just broadly say hello. We have about 85, 90 people with you here today from all sectors. So the floor is yours to open with.
Great. Thank you, David. And I big fan of David and followed him over from his previous gig and was excited to hear about this organization and all the work that they're doing. I'm in the Capitol. The CHP that guard the Capitol tell us that on any given day, there's about 1,100 people who come into the Capitol. Over the course of the past year, since March 16th, there have been somewhere, usually the normal number has been around seven to eight people, which tells you a lot about the impact that COVID has had on the Capitol and our government here in Sacramento. It's been incredibly difficult to continue to do our work. That being said, we know that the work has to continue, and we know that there are 40 million Californians depending on us. So we're forging forward. We have our new swearing-in ceremony for the next session on Monday. So we're getting ready for that. My chief of staff has said that the worst thing she did in 2020 was to buy a planner because everything seems to have changed. We're hoping that there's a little bit more predictability in 2021. But having gone through 1 year of COVID, I think we'll be ready for whatever comes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too want to just thank you for your partnership and your leadership. Unite LA is particularly proud to host you today. And I hope you see I got a little nice fireside backdrop here. So I'm trying to be consistent with the theme. Put my Mr. Rogers sweater on today. Normally I'd wear a Hawaiian shirt, but and I also want to just thank you for your leadership on early childhood education, which I know is so dear to you. And we were honored that Sonia was appointed to your Blue Ribbon Commission for Early Childhood Education, which stimulated the governor's early childhood master plan that just came out this week.
Right, yesterday.
And our first look at that shows that most of the recommendations that your commission put together were embraced by the governor, and if not all, actually. And so we're excited about building support for that. But let me, as we get started here, let me start with a federal question,
Sure.
A national question. Obviously, we'll have a new administration in Washington, and we'll have a new Congress. And we know, I referenced before you join, of course, California and all states have to balance their budgets, meaning we can't print money, but the federal government can print as much as it wants. So the next big move fiscally will have to be from the federal government to help us in California. And I wonder what you're thinking about in terms of how does the state position itself so that when a new president comes out with this 100-day plan and a potential major stimulus package, that California takes advantage of that and gets what it needs and puts it to work in the right sort of way.
Sure, good question. And not only can California not print money, but we also can't carry on debt. I mean, we have a balanced budget requirement here in California. It was interesting in Stephen's remarks, he was talking about how COVID highlighted existing problems relating to income inequality. The Trump administration highlighted an existing problem, which was California not getting its fair share. That existed under Obama as well. It wasn't as, the tone wasn't as nasty, but we weren't getting our fair share. I remember going to DC during the final year of Obama's administration, and we were talking about veterans homeless vouchers. And California at the time had something like 23% of homeless veterans in the country, but we were only getting at the time something like 17% of homeless housing vouchers. So it's been a persistent problem that I think was highlighted even more over the course of the last 4 years. I think having a Californian as vice president is going to help to make sure that we aren't ignored and that we get our fair share. But at the same time, we know that we as a state have to make sure that we reach out to our federal allies. We have obviously Speaker Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy in positions of power in their respective caucuses. We have to keep reminding them about the needs in the state, and also remind them that California is not getting its fair share is a problem that's persisted for a while, and something we need to take care of as soon as we possibly can.
And I want to connect what I think most anticipate, Mr. Speaker, is an infrastructure package tied to a stimulus package. I've had the privilege of serving on the Biden policy team, and it looks pretty certain that there'll be a major package that will both provide infrastructure dollars, maybe infrastructure in a more modern way, not just roads and bridges, but broadband and things that can support our educational institutions. And that could be tied to a jobs bill that actually helps us put people to work. And I'm just wondering what you're thinking about in terms of, again, California being really proactive so that we get a major investment on infrastructure and things that stimulate jobs and recovery.
That's a good question. And depending on the estimate and depending on what you're looking at, we know we're a state of 40 million people. We have done estimates where we're somewhere, our infrastructure build out, depending on what you're talking about, can be at times the infrastructure for a state of 7 million people up to 13 million people. So we're not where we have to be. We've done things during the course of the past couple of years, the big transportation efforts, obviously the parks bonds, those types of efforts that are important. But again, as I said previously, as a state that can't carry debt, there's only so much we can do, and we need to rely on the feds. Another thing that's interesting, and you mentioned it in your question, David, what we think of in terms of infrastructure changes. The idea of broadband being sort of necessary infrastructure was something that we may not have thought of a couple of years ago. It has certainly been highlighted since the stay-at-home policy and the closure of our schools occurred. We have folks not only in rural areas, because the past conversations that we had about broadband access tended to be focused in the extreme northern part of the state and the extreme southern parts of the state. I remember having conversations about 5 years ago with my colleague Jim Wood, who represents the northwestern part of the state, Humboldt, Eureka, Crescent City, and Eduardo Garcia, who represents the southeastern part of the state from Coachella all the way down to the Mexican border. and they talking about the lack of high-speed internet and broadband. Once the school closures happened, we realized that there were pockets of our urban areas that don't have broadband. On 2 days after the election, when I got reselected as speaker by our caucus, I talked about broadband as being one of the priorities, one of the things that we have to do in 2021, because from an infrastructure perspective, it's necessary that we build it, that we make sure everyone has access. With respect to the federal government level, yeah, it's the same. We need to keep communicating with these folks, communicating with our leaders who are in positions of power. And we also need to be a little less shy about our impact on the economy. You know, Stephen and I met at the Port of Los Angeles, between the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach. My goodness, how many jobs, you know, do we produce here in California? And we need to talk to folks and remind folks in Washington, throughout the country, that to a large extent, the economy of the United States is very much tied to what happens here in California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to turn to education. As you know, Unite LA, its mission is to advance quality education, cradle to career, early ed, K-12, higher ed. And we know you share those values. Can you speak a little bit to, I mean, what can we do to build more support from the business community and the broader community to really build the kind of vision we know you have, that there's quality education from birth to career for every Californian?
Well, it's interesting to have you ask me that question, David, because, you know, during your time and Sonia's time at the chamber, you were front and center on a lot of those efforts. I'm not sure how many folks know my journey to Sacramento, how I ended up in this office. I was running early childhood education programs for 20 years. And the budget cuts, the $1.2 billion budget cuts to early childhood education in 2010 were really what inspired me to run for office, inspired a lot of us to run for office from that field. I came to Sacramento and I found in Jerry Brown a governor who I agreed with on a lot of issues, but not on early childhood education. And it was the outreach of folks from chambers all over the state, not only the LA chamber, but I remember OCBC. I had them reach out to Jerry, and having the business community reach out to Jerry about early childhood education, I think really changed the conversation. It really had a different twist to it. It's very obvious. It's not very surprising for an early childhood educator to talk about the need for early childhood education. But for business folks to do it, I think that changed the dynamic here in the building. And we ended up reinvesting the $1.2 billion that were cut from early childhood education. I think continuing to have that level of outreach around education in general is essential. I also think that what we've seen, this sort of generational shift. I talk to folks all the time, particularly at a lot of the large utilities who are talking about having a huge chunk of their population about to retire, about to move on, and the need to have skilled, trained workers, the need to have folks who have a strong educational foundation in those positions is important. And I think that sort of needs to be, we want to have those seamless transitions. And I think the business community reaching out to talk about education is important. There's one more thing I want to talk about, David, and you and I have talked about this. I haven't really talked about this much publicly. During my 20 years in early childhood education, I spent a lot of time at Harvard, for example, which has the Center for the Child at Harvard. Spent a lot of time in Raleigh, Durham, because they have UNC Chapel Hill has a great program on early childhood education. It took me a while to kind of figure it out, but what's amazing is those are also tech hubs as well. Those are important tech hubs on the East Coast. You look at the same thing in Stanford. The Silicon Valley Foundation has invested a lot in early childhood education as well. And when you start to see that seamless transition between strong early childhood education programs, good K through 12 programs, affordable college, high quality, low cost college and university opportunities, and you see that sort of continuum of education, then there shouldn't be a surprise that you have booming economies in those areas. And I think continuing to underline those points, I'm on the UC Board of Regents by virtue of being the speaker. What's amazing is every time you approach a University of California, any of the campuses, you always find these sort of industrial complexes on the outskirts, filled with people, filled with innovators, inventing ideas who come from the university or work with the universities. And to start to think about education as being tied to innovation, not as separate, not something that you leave school and go off and go do something else. It's all part of the same continuum. I think that's really a great way for the folks on this call to start communicating to policy leaders about education, about the impact of education.
You do remind me, though, Mr. Speaker, these tech sectors sometimes feel like they have to import labor from across the world. And it does seem to me that it's really important. It goes back to our principles for a new economy, that we recommit ourselves to homegrown talent, that the children living here in this state should be the ones that fuel the economic future prosperity. Would you comment on that a little bit?
Completely agree with you. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think I think the best way to ensure that we do that is to make sure that we have high quality, low cost public institutions and affordable private universities as well. But no, I completely agree with you. When we look at particularly the dip in the economy, California will always be a place where we will benefit from immigration, or are being perched on the Pacific Rim and between two countries in North America, relatively close to two large countries in North America, we will always benefit from immigration. But I think you're right, David. I think it's important to make sure that we emphasize skill acquisition and education, so that we can continue to make sure that Californians are prepared for the job market.
So now let me switch to a couple of questions about COVID.
Sure.
Obviously, we know how much that affected all of us, but most affected are communities of color, both economically and literally, of the effects of the disease itself, or the virus itself, on morbidity and sickness. And it's further exposed the thing we kind of all knew, but we weren't facing up to, which is deeply rooted structural racism that has been embedded in our institutions for 4 centuries. How do you think we need to grapple with this as a state, to really both deal with the short-term crisis that was created by, Stephen's numbers, which are disproportionately people of color dislocated from work, as well as sort of the longer-term question? How do we keep our eye on dealing with the crisis of the moment, but also make sure that we're not satisfied with recovering back, as Stephen said, but building on new society and a new economy? Yeah,
it's a good question. We know the ethnic group most impacted by COVID has been the Pacific Islander community. We see that in particularly in parts of Southern California. We in the Latino caucus early on went down to the Central Valley to look at the impact of COVID on farm workers, predominantly Latino and Southeast Asian farm workers in the Central Valley. We know that, to your point, that folks of color have been more greatly impacted by COVID than others, not only in terms of getting the virus, but also in terms of care once they do have the virus. And you're right, all of this is linked. Quality, affordable healthcare is missing, in particularly in those communities. I think when as we continue to hopefully move forward and get back on our feet, I think we do need to heed Stephen's advice and continue to think about not going back to the way things were before, but to have a more just economy. For us in the legislature, the passing the $15 minimum wage, I think, was a good start. Getting farm worker overtime after, I think it was a 73-year battle, is a good effort as well. But we know we can do more. We know that a huge barrier to economic equality is education. And we know that having a quality public education system is part of that pathway. And if I can step back and talk about my background a little bit, how I came to be focused on early childhood education was this way. After graduate school, I worked for an organization called the Mexican American Opportunity Foundation. I ran two types of programs. I ran gang programs, and I ran early childhood education programs. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I figured it out really quickly that in families and communities where you had high quality early childhood education programs, the gang problems down the line, 10, 15 years down the line, were less severe, less frequent occurrences. And for me, that was really the pathway for transforming communities. So I jumped in full time and devoted myself exclusively to early childhood education during the latter part of my career. So for me, that's a big part of economic equality. I really think the clock is ticking on economic inequality. I think the frustration that you see on the part of a lot of folks has reached a fever pitch, and the time to sit idly by is long past.
So thank you for that, first of all, Mr. Speaker. And I do want to, we're going to go to some questions. I'm going to give the first question to one of my colleagues that are co-hosting today. But I just want to acknowledge again your leadership on paid family leave. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, I was privileged to serve on the paid family leave task force by Governor Newsom, and it just helped me understand that if we're going to really build out access to quality early care and education, the first caretaker should be the parent. So congratulations, Papa. As some of you know, the speaker has become a father in this past year. And is experiencing what we all do as parents, that we are the ones that care the most. We're the ones that most have the loving connection. To see that the average low-income mom or dad sometimes go to work as few as 2 or 3 weeks after the birth of their child is just incomprehensible to me. And at the same time, too, as we try to fund the system, that's the most expensive care to fund. Why are we funding it that way? Why wouldn't we just give a parent a chance to stay home? So thank you for your leadership. And we think we're on a pathway to 6 months of full wage reimbursement, right, so that first leg of life is with a parent at home.
Right.
So thank you. And any advice you have for us on how to build support for that?
Well, first of all, my daughter is, she's a year old now. And what's interesting about COVID is as an elected official, we generally spend a lot of time on weekends at community events. Having those events not take place I've been able to spend far more time with my daughter during this first year than I thought I would. And as somebody who worked in early childhood education for 20 years, I know how important those bonds are, and I know how important it is to be able to spend the time with her that I do. I think what's important is to make sure that there's folks from the business community who are making those arguments. You have folks like me who, heck, I'm on board, that. But I think the folks who need the most convincing are going to benefit the most by hearing from folks in the business community about the need for those types of services. And quite honestly, David, we're behind the rest of the world on this in a lot of ways. I sometimes get a little embarrassed when people talk about California leading the way. We're leading the way within the United States on a lot of issues, but relative to the rest of the world, we as a state and we as a country are behind. We're behind the curve, and then this issue is certainly an issue where we are behind. And to talk about the economic progress of countries that do have longer family leave, I think it's a good data point for a lot of folks.
Okay, so we're going to go to some questions. I want you to know you got some congratulations on the birth of your daughter, by the way, in the text. So one of my colleagues that's co-hosting today is the CEO of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, Rana Galvan. So Rana, do you want to address the first question?
Absolutely, David. First of all, thank you so much for Unite LA for bringing us together today. It's always great partnering with organizations like yours to make sure our business community is connected to our education partner and to those who are making a difference to ensuring the success of our youth. Workforce development is extremely important to us, and we really value those relationships. So first of all, thank you so much to you, David, and your team for having us here today. And thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for being with us, and thank you for your leadership. Like you mentioned, yes, the business community's voice is important at the table, and we appreciate all that you do for us. I think what we wanted to address today was homeless students. That's something that really we take to heart. And I tell you, someone who came here back in 2001 as an international student, where English was my third language, I value our public education system and the opportunities that we're given, and for those who are fighting for equal opportunities for all. The statistics around homeless students was really staggering. About 20% of our LACC students currently are experiencing homelessness. So as working through our community foundation, we will soon be launching a program called Room for Success, where we're going to be providing in this coming semester housing for college students attending LACC and connecting them with wraparound services to ensure their success, connecting them with hopefully internships and getting them through the finish line to graduate and get a job. What are the steps that the state is taking to tackle the important issue of homeless youth in our communities?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. One of my first meetings as a member of the Cal State Board of Trustees was a sobering one when they came and released their survey results on the number of homeless Cal State students who are living in the streets, students who are living in their cars, students who are, sleeping, regularly sleeping on the couches of friends. Really, really harrowing. The last two budgets that we have had set-asides for homeless youth. It's about 8% in each of the last two budgets, mandatory to be spent on homeless youth. Obviously, a lot of that goes to students. We also established sort of a pantry system at the Cal State campuses where there's available food, canned food, and in some instances fresh food for students so they can they can be fed and have those services. So I think those are good first steps. But overall, we know that the overall homelessness problem is a problem also relating to housing, and we need to make sure we get more housing units online. We need to make sure we not only have a supply of housing units, but we also need to make sure that they're affordable. We've taken great steps over the course of the past couple of years to try to entice, whether it's a carrot approach or a stick approach, to try to get cities to get more housing online as quickly as possible. So I think that those efforts, alongside with the 8% funds specifically for homeless youth, I think are a start. But this is the homeless problem took us generations to get into it, and it'll unfortunately take us a while to get out of it. And we need to stay focused.
Thank you, Rana.
Thank you so much. Thank you, David.
So, Mr. Speaker, we have a flood of questions, so I have to unfortunately make a few choices to give you a few questions here. But one question came in. Can you share your thoughts a little bit on public and higher education overall, public higher education, where it's going to land in the context of COVID and post-COVID California?
Not exactly sure I understand the question. I mean, I think in California, we have a remarkable public education system, not quite as affordable as it was. When I started Cal State Fullerton in 1988, my first tuition for a semester was $283. We know that has changed significantly. That being said, it's still, relative to a lot of other states, it's a bargain. Relative to other countries, it's not. And I think we definitely need to focus on affordability. Our public institute, our higher education system is one that is underbuilt. We know that we need additional Cal State and UC campuses throughout the state. With respect to COVID, I think it's been interesting in that, again, this kind of seems to be a theme that we've been talking about. A lot of the problems relating to whether it's broadband access, housing scarcity, those types of things have been exacerbated on and around campuses at our UC and Cal State campuses, at our community college campuses as well. So continuing to focus on those things is essential. But I really believe that affordability is the key. I grew up in a family where $283 a semester was affordable, and I knew I could work part-time and pay my bills, pay my tuition, pay for my books. If I had been born a good 20, 30 years later and looked at tuition that was 4 digits rather than 3 digits, I might have rethought whether or not I was going to do that. And I think that mental hurdle is something that that people often kind of overlook.
Yeah, you remind me when I went earlier than you did, Mr. Speaker, community colleges were $15 a unit and the UC was $225. I could pay for that working in a grocery store. So I had a good union job in a grocery store and I funded my entire higher education because really it was the California taxpayers, my parents' generation, that were subsidizing, which we've walked away from to a great degree.
To your point, David, I got a BA, an MA, a PhD. I did a couple of years of postdoctoral work. I ended up with about $5,000 in student loans. It's unbelievable. Yeah. It's unimaginable now.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get some loan forgiveness coming out of this next administration. That would be marvelous. So we have a couple questions about childcare workers. As you know, those childcare workers have been just devastated through the COVID quarantine. How is that going to be prioritized in this next session to help that sector recover and those workers that are so vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. You talked earlier, Sonia was on my Blue Ribbon Commission for Early Childhood Education. We thought it was exceptionally important that we had a childcare employee on that commission, and she served exceptionally well. And now a unionized childcare employee, and I think that's essential as well. One thing we know, there's a lot that we know about organized labor. Not only do we know that when bargaining collectively, their ability to secure higher wages is something that is going to happen. But we also know that the ability to lobby for effective continuation of those programs is increased when you have unionized employees. When I was running Head Start programs in the mid to late 90s, I would always go to DC to lobby for Head Start funds with my unionized employees and going and talking to different members of Congress about the need to continue those programs. With respect to COVID, we know that those childcare workers have been greatly hampered by the virus and the shutdown. We I believe it was in July, some childcare programs in some counties were able to kind of come back online, and we wanted to make sure that we did that for a myriad of reasons, not only for the parents and for the kids, but also for those workers. But we also need to continue to regard childcare and childcare workers as what they are, which are essential programs and essential workers. I mean, they are so central to our economy and so incredibly central to making sure that we have kids that are prepared for kindergarten. So I think having a new consciousness about what early childhood education is and its benefits is important. And now, we're 50 years in to Head Start now. We have data. There's no excuse to not look at the data and talk about the impact of these programs. We know what's true about exposing kids to early childhood education.
So let me ask you a question about revenue. Obviously, Prop 15 didn't pass. As we think about trying to properly fund our whole cradle-to-career system. CSBA had a proposition they were going to put on and pulled it back and may come back in 2022 that had an income tax component and a corporate tax piece. Do you think there's a possibility for some grand bargain, Mr. Speaker, where we put together a mix of revenue enhancements that can politically be viable to the stakeholders and better fund public education and other needed things?
I do. I think particularly if this is my pitch now, particularly if the folks on the call, continue to remain engaged and to reach out to policymakers. I was disappointed about the failure of Proposition 15. I was an early supporter and wanted to make sure that we have that much needed revenue. We know, again, back to Stephen's opening comments, we knew there was a need for additional revenue in the state. Also a need to kind of rethink our revenue sources and how we get revenue in the state, and not only how we spend it. And I think that's been, again, exacerbated by COVID, or better illuminated, I should say, by COVID. A little early, members get sworn in on Monday at noon, which means Monday at 12:01, there'll probably be 700 bills already across the desk. So I'm not quite sure what's out there, but I'm sure there are going to be several efforts to raise revenue, particularly with the failure of Proposition 15.
Well, so Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. On behalf of Unite LA and my whole team and our partners, LAEDC, the Hollywood Chamber, and latech.org, we're honored to have this chat with you today. We're very grateful to you and your leadership and public service. Any final comments you want to add as we say?
Just thank you, David. I'm a big believer in what you're doing. The work that you and Sonia did at the chamber was incredibly impressive, and I'm excited about both of you wearing these new hats, and I want to be as helpful as I possibly can.
Wonderful. Well, big hand. If we were in person, everybody would be clapping. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stay safe, and your little girl and your wife. And thank you to all of our participants that came to this fireside chat. And everybody take care.
Thank you.